Hey everybody. If you watched my last video, you know I've been working on this cute habit tracking application called Habit Hatchery. It's live at habithatchery.com. Go check it out. But essentially, you can hatch cute creatures, and you can either track your habits or track Pomodoro timers. And once you've done that, you can click into them. You can start adding your habits, start tracking them. I've got Felix who tracks my fitness habits, and so I can go in, look at my steps for the past couple days, and yeah, I think this is really fun. It's cute, and I want to keep adding ways to grow these creatures as you track your habits. Now, as much as I'd love to keep selling you on my habit tracking application, I'm actually here today to talk about observability. And if you're a solo dev, an indie dev, and you have launched things to users, you've probably experienced a pain point that is debugging bug reports and fixing issues that you see in production and trying to reproduce them in development so that you can fix them. Now, if you run into a problem when you're developing locally, you'll probably have your console up and you'll see it pop up in the console, the error message, and you can go fix it from there. But if a customer runs into an error and you don't have any observability, you might not have any way to examine the error log that occurred. Or if you're using some hosting provider, in my case, I'm using Render, you can see there's a logs tab where you can sift through production logs, but you'll literally have to be scrolling up or command Fing, which is not ideal. Basically, my pitch is any team, even solo teams with indie devs, should be using observability. And I've been loving Axiom. Now, I'm not sponsored by Axiom, but I've used them for this project and another project. And while there are other observability platforms, I just want to talk about OpenTelemetry today and how I'm using it in my projects and help you adapt it into your project. Now, the first thing I'll demonstrate is OpenTelemetry, specifically traces and spans. So I'm in my code repository really quick, and if I go to any service, for example, the habit service, and I go to some implementation of a function, let's say get creature habits. As I highlighted in my last video, I'm using effect, and this effect.fn method takes its first argument is essentially a name or like a human readable label for the method. And the reason for this is because effect will auto-instrument your code such that when your application is running, each effect.fn call is going to create a new span within your traces, and you can track how long that span takes to execute. So just to show you visibly, I have, here habit service.getCreatureHabits. And if I go back to Axiom, as I said, Axiom is where I'm sending this telemetry data. And if I go to stream here and I go to this data set that I've created, you can see a long stream of logs and traces here. But in particular, I can filter by name equals, and we have habit service, get creature habits, and we're gonna see a bunch of stuff pop up here, and I can click on any one of these, and you can see indeed the name habit service.getCreatureHabits. This is a span for a particular invocation of that method. Now, the amazing thing here is this view trace button. If I go here, boom, you can see the entire execution for the route that included getCreatureHabits. You can see that this entire execution started with a API call to get creatures/id/habits. And if I go here, you can see that the entire request lasted about 400 milliseconds, and I can go to events and I can see the status code. I can see the actual route with the creature ID, which is helpful for me, but maybe something that you would want to omit. And then, here's this particular call to get creature habits after I authenticate the user. And you can start to break that out into its repository methods and all the various queries that we're making here. Anyway, hopefully I don't have to belabor this too much, but for the sake of optimizing your application, I think it's very apparent how useful this can be, seeing how long each operation takes and allowing you to identify the bottlenecks in your application. Now, going back to the previous page, you can see some of these are red. These are some errors that I tried to create in my development environment for the sake of creating this video. You can see Habit Hatchery API development. This is also cool. You can separate out your spans and your traces by environment. So here's the development environment. And you can see here in events that there's an error event, specifically a type error, and you can see that undefined is not a function. So you can catch these runtime exceptions in your traces. And if I actually go back to view trace, you can see exactly what invocation failed. It's this get creature habits here. It wasn't either of these repository methods, and so we know that there's some business logic after these that failed. So pretty cool. And if I go back to the top here, you can see events, you can see the exception message, and this is everything you could ever want for debugging production issues and getting fixes out to your users quickly. So as I mentioned, in the actual code, effect does a lot of this auto-instrumentation. Specifically, every time I call effect.log, it will create and append an event to the span. And so that's how we get this receive request, sent response events in those spans with the status code and the method and so on. There is a little bit of setup with sending these to Axiom, but it is so straightforward. You just have to pull in a bunch of these OpenTelemetry libraries. If you're unfamiliar with OpenTelemetry, it's an amazing thing. It's essentially like a standard or protocol that a bunch of providers follow for sending and receiving this telemetry data. And the important thing is that since it's a standard and most of the providers follow it, you don't have any vendor lock-in. And so if I was ever upset with Axiom, for example, I could move to another provider that supports OpenTelemetry, and almost all of them do. And also they've written a lot of this code for you for setting up the providers, and even Effect has an Effect OpenTelemetry library that I'm using here to initialize the Node SDK, pass in the dataset that I'm using and the authorization, the API token that I'm using for Axiom. You can see here the service name is, as I mentioned, specifying the environments with Habit Hatchery API, and we're just also passing along this trace exporter to send those spans to Axiom. So yeah, this is a super straightforward setup. And then in the actual app here, or rather in the runtime, I pass in the OpenTelemetry layer to the app layer. And things just work. It's a beautiful thing. I don't have to really do anything, and I'm getting so much value, all that observability into the errors that my users are seeing. Now, the thing that I love about Render 2 is that when you create one of these new data sets to dump your telemetry data into, they just show you like all of these guides for ingesting the data. And if you look, like pretty much everything is supported. And so for the last one, I was using Node, and so we have Node using OpenTelemetry here. They also have like Winston and Pinot, which are popular logging libraries, and then you pretty much have any other language or service that you would want integrated here. In my case, since I'm deployed on Render, I can just open these Render logs and figure out how to send logs from Render to Axiom, and it looks like it's pretty straightforward. Anyway, this was a pretty quick video, but I think it's super valuable, so hopefully this helped you figure out how to set up OpenTelemetry, or at least convince you why you should use OpenTelemetry or any telemetry in your application, even if you're an indie dev, or I would say especially if you're an indie dev who needs to efficiently debug issues that your users are seeing. I'm just using Axiom's free plan, and it lets me ingest all these spans. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're just building personal projects, really there's no excuse to sign up with Axiom and start exporting your spans there, or any provider. As I said, I'm not sponsored by Axiom, but I've just had a great experience using them. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Yeah, thanks for watching. I'm looking forward to providing more updates with the development of Habit Hatchery. But till then, take care. Have a good one.